All right, so it's the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see so many folks here for the webinar. It is a pleasure to host this and to work with my colleague Sharon Walker on this presentation. So let me go ahead and share the screen. And as you'll see, the presentation today is Adult Learning Principles for Effective Teacher Professional Learning. So I am Don Finn. I am a faculty member here at Regent University School of Education. I'm actually completing my 18th year as a faculty member. Can't believe that it's been that long, but it's been a great experience. I actually have a background as being a former social studies teacher, where I taught grades 7 through 12, and also have served in national level leadership related to adult education through the Coalition on Adult Basic Education. I was actually on the executive board for 10 years, served as the president, and had the opportunity to, through that position, to present nationally, and also had many opportunities to present through other organizations I was affiliated with, including Virginia Commonwealth University, and of course through Regent University. I'm currently the editor of the COABE Journal, which is a national publication, and that is distributed nationwide. So I'm very happy to have one of the School of Education's most recent doctors, Sharon Walker, who worked under my supervision on her dissertation, who has a long background in teacher professional development. So would you please introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I am so happy to be here. Yes, my name is Dr. Sharon Walker. I am an instructional lead teacher with the ESOL office, which stands for English as a Second Language office of my school district. A little bit about myself. I have a master's degree in administration and another master's in special education, as well as English as a second language. And as Dr. Finn said, and I just mentioned, I now have a doctorate in ETOL, Educational Technology and Online Learning. I have about 23 years of teaching experience, and I hold an advanced professional teaching certificate. I feel so blessed to be a part of this webinar. And my prayer is that I will be able to share some insights with you that will enrich your educational journey. So thank you so much for having me, Dr. Finn.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So the objectives of today's webinar is to talk a little bit about adult learners and to gain an appreciation for understanding adult learners. Actually, I have a master's degree in curriculum instruction with emphasis in adult learning, as well as my doctorate in adult learning as well. So I'm going to do a little adult learning theories 101 along with some characteristics of adults. We're also going to talk about some tips for effective teacher professional learning. And Sharon is going to talk about digital tools and is actually going to have an opportunity to talk a bit about her dissertation research, focusing on Google Classroom, which is a tool that really has its benefits and is one that is showing promise and prominence really in teacher professional learning. So as we look at adults, I like to think of adults kind of like icebergs. And so this is a bit of an enhanced picture, but I think you get the point. Typically it's said that an iceberg, the iceberg that you see above the water really represents maybe somewhere between 80 and 90% of the total mass of the iceberg. And so what is visible, you may only see a few things such as behaviors or hearing folks lend perspectives and so on. Yet there's so much that's under the waterline that's not visible that really identifies adults as individuals, such as their perceptions, their attitudes, their values, and their beliefs. And so when we're looking at adults as learners, teachers, for example, in professional learning opportunities, such as professional development opportunities, sometimes we see behaviors, but we also have to realize that below the surface, there are things that are driving those behaviors, both positive and negative aspects that are driving those behaviors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about general learner characteristics. And one of the things in particular has to do with learning styles. And it's interesting because in some realms there has been some recent research that has said, well, learning styles is one of those things that's not necessarily a science. And I would agree with that. I would also agree that if you are working with individuals who do not have any neurological or perceptual or physical limitations, that these three learning styles, the auditory, visual, and kinesthetic and tactile, are probably pretty universal, but ultimately they can be referred to as preferences. So I know we have visual learners who are out there. I think that I fall into that camp in particular, who are individuals that will look at graphics, they'll draw pictures, they will read text that helps to explain those graphics, envision the topic, play a movie, go on YouTube, and so on, watch demonstrations. Where we have the auditory learners are individuals who learn quite well by listening to words, that they can actually, as they are reading and going through materials, they may develop an internal conversation with the text, and ultimately they're not embarrassed to read aloud or speak aloud at any point in time as they're going through the information. Then you have your kinesthetic and tactile learners. Those are the ones who are going to, make notes in the margins. They're going to use highlighters. They're going to underline text. They may be doodling while they're learning. Oftentimes they feel the words and the ideas, and they do much better with hands-on type of learning as well, whether it's directly related or whether it is something that helps them as to keep their flow of concentration and to jot down ideas. But ultimately, one of the challenges that we have in education, whether it's working with our students directly or working with those who are teaching our students, working with teachers and educators at various levels, is there's so much information out there, but how do you get it in there? And how do you make the information actually meaningful to them? And so, looking at adults as learners, we need to keep in mind that adults are very unique. And so, this is the Adult Ed 101 portion of the presentation that I want to emphasize just a few things. Now, you may have heard of the concept of andragogy. This is really the anchor for understanding adult learners, and ultimately, Andragogy is defined as the art and science of helping adults learn. And it became quite popular in the mid to late 60s with Malcolm Knowles. Malcolm Knowles actually is considered the father of andragogy. He began discussions related to andragogy, which was a concept that actually dates back, as far as being recorded, back to 1833. Alexander Kapp is the gentleman's name, who actually shared about the differences between adult learners and children as learners, and talked about the fact that the pedagogical approach, the pedagogy which we use with children, ped meaning child and goji meaning study of or leading it even, that oftentimes in many settings, a pedagogical, very direct, teacher-driven approach may be appropriate, but typically is not appropriate for very long when you're working with adult learners. And in fact, a key element of andragogy is that the teacher, the instructor, serves as a facilitator of learning. And so you can see that there are 5 assumptions, and if you look at the visual at the right, there are 5 assumptions about adult learners. The first being that adults tend to be problem-oriented or problem-centered, that adults are, they typically join into learning opportunities because they have an issue that needs to be addressed, whether it's a professional or personal issue. There's some problem or some issue that needs to be addressed. They have experience that they bring with them into the learning setting, and those experiences really do help to shape them. And there are times, depending on the context or the type of learning that they are in, there may be some negative associations that they have based on past experience with the learning. And so that could result in some learner resistance. But on the plus side, the experiences that adults bring with them often help them to make connections to prior learning. Also, adults tend to be very motivated. Typically, there is an intrinsic point of motivation. There's something that they want to learn. Again, it may be problem-centered, which could be influenced from an extrinsic or outside perspective, maybe even a societal perspective. But for the most part, there is a motivation that's driving these adults to be in that learning setting. They are typically not in learning because it's compulsory. They also are looking for an immediacy or an application. How can they apply that to their situation? How can they apply the learning in a practical way? And of course, then they are self-directed. And so self-directedness is really the goal of andragogy ultimately, and it really is based on that. So self-directed learning, what is it? Well, first of all, it's based on the assumption, and this is where Knowles really began investigating the idea of andragogy, because he looked at the work of Houle, Cyril Houle, who is a psychologist who was pretty well known in the late 50s and through the 60s, who talked about self-directed learning and saying, learning is widespread and it occurs every day. Every day in life, there are learning opportunities. It's systematic. It's part of the system, yet it's not dependent upon the classroom or the instructor. There's learning that occurs every day. For example, you're driving to work. You see people who are pulled over on the side of the road by law enforcement. Well, you may learn that, this is a place where a speed trap is. And so you've learned a very practical lesson. Learning can also be, looking at the norms within a learning setting or out in society. Knowing how to order, for example, at a restaurant, or what the processes are. But the goals of self-directed learning are ultimately to develop the learner's capacity to be self-directed. And so focusing on the principles of andragogy and understanding those characteristics of adult learners and fostering self-directedness actually helps to enhance the capacity for self-directedness, but also for the learners to become critically reflective. That's very important with adults. They need to be critically reflective in what they're learning, and also for them to be really emancipated from organized learning. The focus of how to foster self-direction and student control of learning is also different. So here is a pedagogy andragogy comparison. And as you can see, with each one of these, the teacher is represented by having the green tam. Now, when you look at the pedagogical model, you can see that there is a top-down approach to learning. The learning opportunities, the curriculum, and the evaluation, all of those things are directed by the teacher. Yet you can see, and what I like about this visual is that there is exchange. The double arrows indicate that there are exchanges all over the place between learners, between the teacher and learners, between learners and teachers, and so on. There's a continuous communication and a continuous flow. So what I like about this particular quote is that, when you read it, no one who ever bought a drill wanted a drill. They wanted a hole. And so when you think about it, it really is the task that matters. And going back to that concept that adult learners know what they want and what they need. So this leads us to heutagogy. Now, heutagogy, what it basically is called is self-determined learning. And while the instructor is there to maybe provide some guidance or consultation for the learning, they really relinquish the control or the ownership of the learning to the learner. And it becomes learner-directed learning. Now, self-directedness has to do with looking at resources and helping to foster a level of independence. Heutagogy, though, is the next step in the process. And if you look at the visual here, you'll notice the arrow on the right-hand side shows the progression of learner autonomy. The more autonomous the learner is, the more sophisticated the learner is, the more independent they become. So learner maturity and autonomy increases, instructor control decreases. And so there's the continuum here, the PAH continuum, where you can see that what to learn is determined and directed by the teacher in the pedagogical model. In andragogy, what is learned is determined by the teacher, but how to learn is more under the control of the learner. And then with heutagogy, what to learn and how to learn it are the responsibilities that shift entirely on the learner. And the instructor then becomes more of a consultant, more of a guide. So there's technoandragogy that has to do with the integration or techno-heutagogy, excuse me, that has to do with the integration of heutagogy into the online learning environment. It's guided by three principles. First of all, let the learners do most of the teaching. Put the learners in the position of taking the knowledge, taking the learning, and expressing that and teaching others. Engage or enrage, design with maximum interactivity to facilitate both content and social engagement. So community and fostering community and engagement is very important in techno-heutagogy, and then making the instructional design decisions to maximize those opportunities for the learners to add a social and cognitive teaching presence. And we know that much of learning, particularly since COVID, has become online and has been technology dependent, particularly online technologies. And so this leads to digital teacher professional learning, which I'm going to now hand the reins over to Dr. Sharon.
Hello again, everyone. And so let's go on and talk about professional development. The research shows that in-service teacher training can impact teacher effectiveness and favorable student outcomes. In fact, in 2015, research by Bush showed students' academic success is directly related to the abilities and the skills of the educator. So consequently, careful consideration should be given to developing continuing education practices so that students will receive best practices. Yet, in general, traditional forms of professional development have been considered to be ineffective. This is in research cited by Kraft and Blazer of 2018. Additional research also indicated that conventional workshops have not produced teacher effectiveness as desired. Limited time and geographical constraints are factors that have impacted attendance at teacher training activities. Studies have shown that educators resist attending in-service training after a day of teaching, especially when traveling to the event is necessary. Research done by Oper and Petter in 2011 confirmed that traditional in-person PDs offer little opportunity for sustainable and ongoing collaboration among participants after the workshop ends. However, research does show that one way to improve teacher PD is to integrate web technologies and tools into teacher training opportunities. Indeed, when used for academic purposes, internet tools can substantially increase the rigor of instruction because of their capability to nurture teamwork and encourage participation. Nowadays, with the advent of Web 2.0 tools, educators can achieve enhanced learning by creating learning communities where participants can collaborate and exchange knowledge and ideas without geographical constraints or time constraints. So, can online platforms be a viable tool for professional development? This is what I did my dissertation on. When the pandemic hit, my school district used Google Classroom for not only student instruction, but for teacher professional development. I wanted to find out to what extent did the teachers perceive Google Classroom as a viable tool for PD, and what were the most commonly perceived benefits for using Google Classroom for PD. So some of the findings from my research show that participants really admired Google Classroom for its user friendliness. They felt that the ease of use and the accessibility of the platform made it a viable tool for teachers' PD, and that these features actually facilitated self-directed education. In terms of communication, they praised the platform for its features that allowed users to communicate effortlessly with other students and instructors, which they really liked. And in terms of engagement, the findings showed that participants really considered this an advantage because they could stay in contact with each other and their instructors during and after the course had ended. They emphasized how much the interactivity of Google Classroom facilitated their ability to achieve their professional development goals. And when asked about collaboration, they thought that Google Classroom made connecting with other students and teachers very easy. It increased many opportunities for collaboration. And they felt that Google Classroom made accessing materials for their course easy and appreciated being able to review those materials as often as needed. So in conclusion, my research found that equipping instructors with digital tools and effective pedagogy are essential in any field when conducting professional development. Fundamentally, learners are the benefactors of such practices and methodologies.
And this is what I found so exciting actually about Dr. Sharon's research. Not only has she had years of experience in professional development, but that shift to the online platform really talked about benefits. And so we'll have a little Q&A coming up. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop those in the chat while we wrap this up. Okay. So some tips for effectively working with adult learners. So a few things to keep in mind when you're working with adult learners. Now, you've all heard of the zone of proximal development. This is Vygotsky's theory that actually was developed behind the Iron Curtain, but did not become prevalent until the 1970s when some of his work was released. And, we often think of that zone of proximal development, that zone between what is known and what needs to be known, stretching our learners just a little bit in order to make meaning of the learning that they have. That the zone is important for working with children, but it's also important in working with adults. The basic principles are that the distance between the existing knowledge or materials and the new knowledge or materials is appropriate. Make sure that scaffolding is built into the instruction to give the students, or in this case, the teachers who are engaged in professional learning, give them what they need to accomplish the new skills or the new tasks. And gosh, in the digital age, there are so many references and so many tools that can be embedded and integrated into the learning opportunities. But eventually, then the scaffolding can actually be removed because the student is able to complete the tasks independently. And so then they shift to the next level. But keep in mind that, the ZPD is a moving target. And so as the learner gains new skills and ability, the zone moves progressively forward, ultimately getting to the point of realizing the goals for the instruction. So, but I want to be sure that we don't lose our focus. One of my favorite books is by Stephen Brookfield here, called The Skillful Teacher. The focus of teaching is to help students learn, plain and simple. And I think that's such a basic concept, and I think oftentimes we lose sight of why we are doing what we are doing. Basically, the adults in particular look for credibility in their instructors. They want to be sure that the instructor is credible, that they have a level of expertise, that they really do know their stuff, and that they have the experience when they are conducting the professional development or conducting learning. They also have a rationale or a thought out plan of action, and that they have a conviction that learning is important. They really want to have instructors who are authoritative but not authoritarian. They also want what adults value in their instructors is authenticity, that the words and the actions have congruence, that they line up. That there's full disclosure of expectations and criteria. There's nothing hidden about what the goals are, what the expectations are. There's a responsiveness as well to the students' learning difficulties, and if they're experiencing challenges and difficulties, that really comes through an awareness of the classroom, a with-itness, if you will, of the classroom, but also that they demonstrate that they are people, and that they have experiences, and that they provide appropriate autobiographical examples. But ultimately, what we hope to encourage with this particular webinar is the idea that learning does involve action, and it is something that does not necessarily happen alone. As Dr. Sharon said before, through her study, she found that the engagement that the teachers had through the Google Classroom platform with one another was very important. And so we want to break from the single loop learning where there's problem solving and improvement to double loop learning. We really want to see professional development and professional learning opportunities for teachers that has a true impact on the way that they view their profession, that they look at the underlying assumptions of what they are doing, and that they place value and beliefs behind what to do, that a level of critical thinking is happening in the learning experience, and that is promoting that critical thinking and critical reflection. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the share, and we'll open the floor for any questions. And while we're waiting for for anybody to ask questions, Dr. Sharon, let me ask you a question. So in your years of experience in central office and engaged in professional development, and having seen that shift from in-person professional development to digital professional development, what are some of the biggest trends that you have seen, and maybe the principles that hold true in both types that make PD effective?
Well, one of the things that I've noticed is that teachers really do want to grow. They really want to build their capacity as an educator. Unfortunately, it's not that easy to do after you've been teaching for 7.5 hours a day and then have to go somewhere to attend a professional development or some sort of a workshop. I think what the pandemic taught us was that we can achieve this virtually, and that it really does work, provided that it's done the right way, and that pedagogy and everything that is needed is within that virtual training.
Mhm.
We did see, sort of an uptick of attendance during that time. And through my research, I've spoken to many, many teachers, and they really applaud the opportunity and desire the opportunity to attend workshops that are virtual so that they can, reach their professional development goals.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we actually have a question for you. So we have a question from Dr. Nesbitt. Thank you for the question. It says, Dr. Sharon, what was the most surprising finding from your study? Or what other questions are you interested in exploring further? So what was the most surprising?
I think one
And
of the most
questions?
surprising things from my study was that one participant did mention, as I was focusing on what were the most commonly, what were the benefits and whether they thought it was a viable tool, one person did mention that part of virtual training being effective is the teacher's desire to,
Hmm.
to attend the training, and also to do whatever needs to be done throughout the virtual training. So I thought that was very interesting. And I thought if I do another study, I would like to focus on that aspect of virtual professional development.
Excellent, excellent. Dr. Mills, your hand is up. Please open your mic.
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. Just curious of where Dr. Walker actually works, but the comment I wanted to make, and I know I've talked to you about it, Dr. Finn, is, the whole adult learning concept. So I'm grateful I was able to get onto a little bit of this. I served on someone's dissertation just this week, and that particular person talked about individualized PD for adults, but she got emotional in a concept of, she basically let we give up on the adults too soon. Just similar how we would want to work with students, that these folks want to be better and that we should continue to try to provide that help and not give up on them so fast. And she was K-2 mathematics. So that really touched me this week, just listening to her. But I just wanted to thank you guys again, just for shedding that light on the adult learner and how important that is. But again, I was just curious where you work, because Google Classroom was a thing for everybody until we started jumping into Canvas and these learning management systems. But Google Classroom itself was very beneficial for us when we had to jump into that in K-12 in my school district. So where do you work, Dr.?
You were asking me, where do I work?
Yes, ma'am.
Sure. Prince George's County Public Schools in Maryland. I'm
PG.
an instructional lead teacher with the central office there. with the English as a Second Language office, to be specific.
Thank you. Yeah, I always love to make connections. My first cousin graduated from Friendly High School in Fort Washington.
Oh, wow. That used to be one of my schools on my caseload. So I know it well.
So, Dr. Mills, thank you so much for your observations as well. I think one of the things that I have found as an adult educator, I've actually been in the field, I've been in the education field now for over 30 years, believe it or not, and specializing in adult education really since, oh gosh, I've been an adult educator now for 31 years. And one of the things that I have found is that sometimes there is an underappreciation for working with adults and really understanding the characteristics that they have. As I mentioned earlier, with looking at the internal motivation that they bring, but also the experiences that they bring, which sometimes can have a negative impact, which Dr. Sharon also noted in her study. But you know, that we do need to not give up on the adults. We definitely need to understand that life happens, and that sometimes resistance is really a call for you know, the instructor to maybe look at breaking things down a little bit more. So it's a bit of a call for help and so on, but I really do appreciate that. So I just go ahead, Dr. Allen. Yes, sir. Well, last question.
I appreciate it. I just wanted to ask this question to see how technology may have impacted this. When I was a principal, an elementary principal, we would bring in just great, well-known speakers who would just leave the staff aglow. Everybody would just leave with the best feeling and with the strongest of intentions to go right out and employ what they had just learned. But everybody was so busy that within a day or two, the impact of the staff development was lost and they were back to normal. So what I learned was that you needed to plan for opportunities for the adult learners to practice those. So when I would go in and do an observation, I would look for whatever we had just learned about. And I wonder if the ability to do so much now through technology would maybe even enhance that.
You know, ideas such as study circles and team and departmental types of learning and so on are something that I know that we've tried to do in the face-to-face and so on. But Dr. Sharon, do you want to address that a little bit? Because I know that those ideas did come up in your study.
Absolutely. It certainly did. And one of the things that my participants really praised Google Classroom for, and the fact of using a virtual platform, was the fact that they could go back and look things up and, you know, replay a video or a discussion that they might have had in a professional learning group, things like that, you know, that they could go back and look at it at any time. And even while in the classroom, and implement those things in the classroom while looking at it. That was one of the things that they really praised and, you know, talked about quite a bit.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, again, I want to thank everybody for joining in. We're running over just a little bit here, but thank you so much for your interest in this webinar, and the recording will be made available later on. But thank you again for your participation, and God bless.
Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.